You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am the Jacob Valk, and you're not. At the end of this show, you're going to get the interview that I did with Andy Martino, the author of the book on the Houston Astros sign-stealing scandal. Really nice guy, enjoyed talking to him. But I have to start with an apology. I know I apologized all throughout Friday's show for the format of it, but I feel like I need to do it again. I hated doing that. That was terrible. It was in essence a speed run of the Jacob Valk Show, and no one wants that. I mean, look, I had a full episode recorded. I was going to post it, and then my computer crashed. It's just one of those things. It can happen to anyone. I know why it crashed. I fixed something, so it's not going to happen again. But I did feel bad about it, because you deserve better. You were expecting me to go in depth on the NBA and the NHL, and I couldn't do that. I was really pressed for time, and I had to make a choice. Do I do something quickly, or do I just say there's going to be no show today because the computer crashed? That thought went through my head, I'm not going to lie to you. At the end of the day, I decided on a Cliff Notes version because there was a lot to talk about. If it was a slower day, yeah, I probably wouldn't have posted anything, but I figured something was better than nothing. Let's put it this way. You know that that's not a fair representation of the overall quality of this show. It's unfortunate that it had to come to that. Again, I'm truly sorry. Hopefully it never happens again. I can't say that it's definitely never going to happen again. I'm not in charge of whether my computer crashes or not. But I don't think it'll happen again. Let's put it that way. Again, though, I can't say this enough. I am truly, truly sorry. But now on to the fun stuff. The NBA playoffs. I'm going to go through all 4 playoff series. And I'll start with Sixers-Hawks. The big story there was the Sixers defense clamping down on the Hawks' 3-point attack. The Hawks shot just 26% from beyond the arc, 6 for 23. Only 3 Hawks hit a 3-point shot on Friday night. Trae Young, Bogdan Bogdanovic, and Kevin Huerter. If you're the Hawks, you're not going to win like that. I mean, I'll say this. Trae Young did a solid job against Ben Simmons. He did get 28 points. He was the high man. Simmons did step up his game offensively. He had 18 points. Joel Embiid nearly had a triple-double. Tobias Harris nearly had a double-double. The Sixers are just proving here that they are the better team. They're more well-rounded than the Hawks. Overall, they have more talent. Look, the future is bright for the Hawks. Make no mistake about that. They're going to be a fun team to follow. And it wouldn't surprise me if in the next 5 to 10 years they won a title. But not this year. This is sort of reminding me of the Jazz-Grizzlies series. The Grizzlies take game 1. Everyone starts panicking. Then the Jazz win 4 straight. It's like, you were worried about us? Really? Come on. It's the same thing here. The Sixers are fine. They're going to put a stranglehold on the series tonight. The Sixers are going to the Eastern Conference Finals. Who they'll face when they get there is a mystery. I can't say with 100% confidence that it's going to be the Brooklyn Nets. And that absolutely terrifies me. Nothing would be worse than to see this team lose in the second round. After everything that's happened, after all the smack talk I've done, to see this team lose in the second round would be really hard to swallow. I mean, I'll say this. The series isn't over yet. If I'm looking at the series from afar, I see that it's down to a best 2 out of 3. Games 5 and 7 are in Brooklyn. I said Nets in 6 before the series started. It's still very possible that the Nets could win this thing. The thing is, though, 2/3 of what makes the Nets a juggernaut may not be on the floor tomorrow. We all know about James Harden. His hamstring is still hurt. But yesterday, Kyrie Irving sprained his ankle. X-rays were negative. He just landed funny. It looked like it really hurt. I mean, I'm watching that game and I'm just screaming at the top of my lungs, no, no, dear God, no. It's bad enough playing without James Harden. But if you add Kyrie Irving to that mix, KD, I love you. I really do. You're one of the 5 best players in the NBA. But I don't know if you can beat this Bucks team without any help in a best 2 out of 3. And yeah, he had no help yesterday. Durant and Kyrie were the only Nets yesterday that scored in the double digits. And I'm going to tell you why that happened. Once Kyrie was out, Durant obviously had to pick up the slack. That's to be expected. But once that happens, it's very easy for the defense to key in on you. You can double, you can leave other players open. Fine, I'll let player X kill me, as long as it's not Kevin Durant. You know, I'll live with Blake Griffin taking threes. I'll live with Mike James shooting. If I can limit KD, if I can key in on him and limit his effectiveness, I've won this game. I mean, let's be honest. Right when you saw Kyrie get hurt, you knew that game was over. You knew that the Bucks were going to win. Which makes that Game 3 loss that much more important. It's the difference between being up 3-1 versus being tied 2-2. I can say that Durant can win one game by himself. Okay, I've seen players do that in these playoffs. Cough, cough, Jason Tatum. But 2 out of 3 is tough. I don't care that games 5 and 7 are in Brooklyn. You need to outscore Giannis, Chris Middleton, and Jrue Holiday. That's tough. I mean, let's be honest. If Durant is by himself, he needs to score 50 if the Nets are going to win. Can Durant do that? The answer is yes. We all know that he's talented enough to put up 50. But if the whole Bucks defense is keying in on him and making him take contested shots or getting the ball out of his hands, that's tough. You know, Kevin Durant has only scored 50 points once in a playoff game. It was Game 6 of the first round of the 2019 NBA playoffs. It was against the Clippers. Durant put up 50. It was a great performance. But think about who he was playing with. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, who got a triple-double in that game. If he's playing with Mike James, Bruce Brown, Joe Harris, and Blake Griffin, there is no way on this earth that Kevin Durant will drop 50. The Nets have been cautious all year with their players' injuries. And that was to keep them fresh for the playoffs. Has it worked? As of this very moment, you can make the argument that the answer is no. I mean, you can't say that the Harden and Kyrie injuries are because the Nets didn't play those guys 72 games in the regular season. But it's time to put your foot on the gas. Enough is enough. You can't take it slow anymore. This is a must-win game for both teams. Whoever wins that game tomorrow night is winning this series. Enough waiting for James Harden to be 100%. He needs to go tomorrow night, okay? It's just that simple. I need to see James Harden play tomorrow night. His hamstring's a little tight. I understand that it's a hamstring that's affected him for a while now. Okay, I get that. I get being cautious. The last thing you want is a Kevin Durant situation. You'll force the guy to play when he really can't. The injury becomes more serious. And then you'll lose him for the whole year. Okay, I understand that. But it doesn't seem like this injury is as serious as the Durant injury that he tried to play through at the end of his Warriors tenure. James Harden needs to play. And the Kyrie injury, if it's a sprain, the reality is that's a pain tolerance issue. A sprain can progress into something worse, but it is more of a pain tolerance issue. Look, you've got to ice that ankle down, heat it up. This isn't for me to say, but if he wants to take some painkillers, let him. I'm not saying go crazy with them like Greg House, but in a therapeutic manner, if that's what he needs to do to play, he's got to do it, okay? The time for playing it safe has passed. This is the playoffs. This is a must-win game. You have Steve Nash saying that the Kyrie injury won't affect how we deal with the Harden injury. If that's the truth, then someone needs to shake some sense into them. Because it needs to. I understand you want to do right by each individual player. Okay, I get that. But you know what? These guys also want to win. You think they want to see the Nets lose in the second round? I don't think so. I mean, here's the nightmare scenario. The Nets lose this year. Next year becomes title or bust, even more so than this year. Another super team forms. You can't tell me that's impossible. And then your road to a title just got that much more difficult. You know, I don't want to scream doom and gloom. Like I said, it's possible that Harden plays tomorrow. It's possible that Kyrie plays tomorrow. I think the smart money is on Harden playing tomorrow and Kyrie sitting out. And then it becomes, can Durant and Harden beat Giannis, Middleton, and Holiday? It's not impossible for the Nets to win this series. Absolutely not. But there's no way that you can be 100% confident if you're a Nets fan. You can be more confident than not. That's okay. You can still say that you think the Nets are going to advance. That's fine. But the reality is, for that to happen, one, or preferably two, of Harden and Kyrie need to play. If they don't, instead of it being Nets in 6, it very well could be Bucks in 6. Or Bucks in 7. It's going to be tough for the Nets to beat this Bucks team twice in a row again. Moving on now to Jazz Clippers. And we have a series. Being back at the Staples Center seems to have motivated the Clippers. It gives me hope as a Nets fan. The crowd at the Staples Center was a factor. The crowd at the Barclays Center needs to be a factor. But when you look at Jazz Clippers, everyone was counting the Clippers out. Paul George was not playing up to the level that we all wanted him to play at. He stepped it up on Saturday. He had 31 points, the most points he's had in a playoff game this year. Kawhi Leonard had 34 points. When those two guys are combining for over 60 points, you're not beating them. Nicholas Batum had an excellent game. Reggie Jackson was really good. He's really the unsung hero of these playoffs for the Clippers. I mean, I gave Donovan Mitchell credit. He still had 30 points. But I thought the Clippers did a really good job of forcing the ball out of his hands. He took 24 shots. He attempted just 9 threes. Those are the lowest marks of this series for him. That's a good job by the Clippers. Force the ball out of his hands. Make someone else kill you. Make Joe Ingles kill you. Make Jordan Clarkson kill you. Make Bojan Bogdanovic kill you. Make Rudy Gobert kill you. Hell, make Royce O'Neal kill you. You know he won't. He's a defensive specialist. The Clippers have a pulse. Make no mistake about it. But they need to win tonight if they're going to have any chance of winning this series. I don't see them coming back from 3-1 down. Especially with 2 of the 3 games being in Utah. I mean, I said that the Clippers would win this series, so I kind of have to pick the Clippers tonight, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Jazz won. we could be looking at a Jazz-Suns Western Conference Finals. You know the NBA would hate that. Speaking of the Suns, they completed their sweep of the Nuggets in a way that left a really bad taste in my mouth. And we all know what I'm talking about. The Nuggets are down 8 with just under 4 minutes left to go in the third quarter. The Suns were outplaying them all throughout that game, but the Nuggets had a chance. Unfortunately for them, that chance was wiped out by a bogus, asinine, ridiculous, whatever adjective you want to use, flagrant 2 call on the MVP of the league, Nikola Jokic. We've all seen the play. Cameron Payne receives the pass. Jokic swipes at it, and his forearm makes contact with Cameron Payne's face. Devin Booker went right up to Jokic, which, give Booker credit, because Jokic could eat Booker for breakfast. That was a good job by Booker in standing up for his teammate. But a bad job by the referees in calling that a flagrant 2. I mean, that is ridiculous. Did Nikola Jokic, when he made that wind up with his arm, make direct contact with Cameron Payne's face, or did he make more contact with the ball? The answer is he made more contact with the ball. Was he trying to make a hard foul? Yes. He said that. He was trying to give his team a spark. Good for him. You're down 8 with just under 4 minutes left to go in the third quarter. You're down 3-0 in the series. You need a jolt. You need an influx of energy. But that's not a flagrant 2. If anything, it's a flagrant 1. Okay, he made contact with Payne's face. Payne went down like a sack of potatoes. It led to a meeting of the minds between Jokic and Booker. You want to call that a flagrant 1, I can live with it. But a flagrant 2? You've got to know the situation there. You have the MVP of the league. His team is down 3-0 in the series. They are losing this game. They are without their second best player in Jamal Murray. By ejecting him, you will eliminate any chance the Nuggets have of winning this game. Thus, their season will be over. Yeah, that's fine with us. Jokic, you're gone. For their season to end that way without their 2 best players on the court, oh, that ticked me off. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from what the Suns did. They played a great game. They played a great series. Chris Paul is playing some of the best basketball he's ever played. Devin Booker is emerging right before our eyes. And I'm happy for Chris Paul. Okay, I like Chris Paul. This is only the second conference finals that he's going to be in. He's one of the best point guards in NBA history. You want to hear something interesting about Chris Paul? This series against the Nuggets is the most points per game he's ever had in a playoff series. He is having a career renaissance right now. I mean, the casual NBA fan may not be into it, but the Suns are an easy team to get behind. You've got the Hall of Fame point guard making another run at an NBA Finals. One of the best opportunities he's ever had. You have the young superstar in Devin Booker. You have an exciting center in DeAndre Ayton, who I like. Maybe he's not great, but he's a good player. He's a very good player. You've got defensive stoppers and Mikal Bridges and Jay Crowder. It's an easy team to get behind. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But look, if you're a Nuggets fan, you have every right to be upset. That's not how you want your season to end. Were you going to come back from 3-0 down? There's a 99.9999999% chance that you wouldn't have. But you want the opportunity to do that with the best roster that you can possibly field. Okay, Jamal Murray was going to be out. We all knew that. All eyes on Jokic, the MVP. You got past the Trailblazers, a team that I didn't think you'd get past. You know what? I thought you matched up well against the Suns. It turns out you didn't, but look, you've got to give the MVP a chance to bring his team back from the brink. The referees will tell you that they can't weigh that into their decision. You can't weigh the fact that the Nuggets were down 3-0 and the score of the game, when the foul happened, all that good stuff. You know what? You should. You should be able to. Think about it. To close that game out, the best player that the Nuggets had may have been Michael Porter Jr. All due respect to Michael Porter Jr., good player, really good player, had a good year. Wouldn't even crack my top 50 of best players in the NBA. If you're a Nuggets fan, you have every right to be upset. And I don't want to hear the argument that you would have lost anyway. Maybe not the game, but you would have lost the series. That's not the point. The Suns need to be able to beat you, not the referees. What was the biggest reason that the Suns won that game? It wasn't Chris Paul going off. It wasn't Devin Booker going off. It was Jokic being out for the final 15 minutes or so of that game. People saying that the NBA has gotten soft are 100% right. As an impartial observer, that left a really bad taste in my mouth. I can't imagine what it must have felt like for a Nuggets fan. Alright, now I'll give you some NHL Valk talk. And there's only one game that I can talk about. Fortunately, it's the Islanders game. They won 2-1. They are now 3 wins away from making their first Stanley Cup Finals in 37 years. 7 wins away from winning their first Stanley Cup Final in 38 years. For the people who don't remember the dynasty, this is the best time ever to be an Islanders fan. The Islanders thoroughly outplayed the Lightning in that game yesterday. A Lightning team that on paper is a million times better than the Islanders. Eddie Olczyk and Brian Boucher said this on the broadcast. You know what? They were 100% right. The Lightning just looked out of it. They looked absolutely dead to the world. And there's absolutely no excuse for that. Their last game against the Hurricanes was Tuesday. To put that in perspective, the Islanders' last game against the Bruins was Wednesday. So So the Lightning had a longer rest period, but the Islanders looked like the team with more speed, more energy, more of an overall desire to win. The Lightning just looked flat. They didn't get a ton of great opportunities. Most of their shots came from the outside. The Islanders will take that any day of the week. That's what Barry Trotz wants you to do. Yes, shoot from the outside. Don't get up close. I mean, all you have to do is to take a look at the 3 goals that were scored in that game, and you'd see the discrepancy in the overall level that both teams played. The first goal, the Barzal goal, was scored with speed and speed alone. Like I said, the Islanders were faster than the Lightning. Granted, Barzal is one of the fastest players in the NHL, but still, you can't let him get behind you like that. Great pass by Bailey. Barzal is without question one of the best players in the NHL when he gets on a breakaway. He has a million ways to beat you. The only way that you can stop him is if he stops himself. If he shoots it right into you, or if he just airmails the puck, or shoots it wide, because you can't do anything to stop him. He's too fast, he's too good. There's nothing you can do. Take a look at the Ryan Pulock goal. That's a goal that Andrei Vasilevsky needs to stop. They said this on the broadcast. Again, 100% right. Ryan Pulock has a howitzer for a shot. But there was no screen. Vasilevsky had every opportunity to see Pulock, to see the puck, to track it, to get in front of it. He just whiffed on it. I mean, that was the dagger. When the Islanders went up 2-0, did you think they were blowing that lead? The way the Lightning had played all throughout that game? I didn't. Oh, but Jacob, the Lightning made it 2-1. Yeah, they had a 6-on-4 man advantage because Brock Nelson committed a stupid penalty. And it was late enough in the game that John Cooper had pulled Vasilevsky. It's hard enough to stop this Lightning team when they have a 1-man advantage. A 2-man advantage? You're not stopping them. They're too good. Of course Braden Point is going to score. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I was a little nervous. Just a little bit. They had time to score another goal, and then once you get into overtime, a million things can happen. I mean, I've said this before, I'm naturally jaded as an Islanders fan. I'm conditioned to automatically expect the worst. This is new to me as an Islanders fan to see this team this good. If you're old enough to remember the dynasty, maybe it's easier for you. But think about all the heartbreak that I've seen as an Islanders fan. Losing to the Leafs and the Senators in back-to-back years, firing Peter Laviolette. The Mike Milbury era, perfectly personified by replacing him with Steve Sterling. The Islanders only scored 5 goals in 4 games against the Lightning in that playoff series. The Scott Gordon years. Seeing John Tavares leave for Toronto, and on, and on, and on. Yeah, there was a tiny fraction of my brain that thought that maybe the Islanders could blow this, but overall, the vast majority of my brain didn't think that. And the Islanders are now up 1-0 in the series. Game 2, tomorrow, I don't want to say becomes a must-win game for the Lightning, but you know what? You can make the argument that it is a must-win game. If the Lightning go down 2-0 with 3 of the remaining 5 games at the Coliseum, which you know is going to be rocking, I don't see how you're beating them. And I will say this. You remember how I told you that my parents and I are going on that trip to South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado the week of July 5th? Well, my mom said that if the Islanders are in the Stanley Cup Finals, we will cancel the trip so that you, Jacob, and your father can see them play. And when I say see them play, I mean see them play in person. It'll be only the 3rd title series that I'll have ever attended. Because I went to a game in 2003, I went to games in 2009. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it's very possible that I could be going to 2 or 3 Islanders games. And of course the border has to be closed. If the Canadiens beat the Golden Knights, the Islanders would have home ice advantage. So depending on when games 3 and 4 were, I'd try to work out a way to go. It's alright. I'll live with games 1 and 2. Maybe 5. Maybe 7. I'll live with it. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Valk talk. Specifically on the Dolphins signing Jerome Baker to a 3-year extension worth a maximum value of $39 million. 28.4 mil of that is guaranteed. This is a terrible move for the Dolphins. Jerome Baker is one of the most overrated players in the NFL. He had a good rookie season in 2018. He had a 70.7 overall grade according to Pro Football Focus. I heard Dolphins fans saying, hey, watch out. He's going to take a big jump forward next year. He's going to be the next Nick Buoniconti. It didn't happen. He regressed terribly. He had a 46.7 overall grade. Oh, but watch out. You know, now that he's more familiar with Brian Flores' system, he's going to take a big step forward, and he had some Dolphins fans satisfied with his performance last year. They look at the 8 sacks. Here's the thing, though. 3 of those sacks came in one game. It was against the Kansas City Chiefs. It was week 14. Yes, that was a really bad performance by Mahomes. Yes, Jerome Baker was great in that game. I'm not knocking him for what he did in that game. But if you have 8 sacks in a season, you can't have 37.5% of them come in one game. I don't care if it's a game against a team as great as the Kansas City Chiefs. And just for whatever it's worth, the Chiefs ended up winning that game. So yes, while Patrick Mahomes was not great in that game, you still lost. Moreover, his overall grade last year, according to Pro Football Focus, was 55.2. Jerome Baker isn't good. Jerome Baker is overrated. Yet somehow, someway, the Dolphins were convinced to give him $13 million a year. That's actually more than they gave Benardrick McKinney. There is no universe where Jerome Baker is better than Benardrick McKinney. Terrible job by the Dolphins. Their whole organization is really overrated. I feel bad for Tua. I think he's being put in a terrible situation. 2 offensive coordinators. I'm not a big Brian Flores fan. And I'm still not over how Jalen Waddle got taken over Devontae Smith. I understand that most people had Waddle over Smith on their boards, but I didn't. I didn't even think it was close. I do want to talk about a really sad death in the baseball world. So I'll give you a little bit of everything today. That, of course, is the death of Jim Mudcat Grant, who died on Friday at the age of 85. Mudcat Grant is, without question, one of the most underrated pitchers of the 1960s. You think of the great pitchers of the 60s. You think of Bob Gibson. You think of Whitey Ford. You think of Sandy Koufax. You think of Don Drysdale. You think of Jim Bunning. It would take you a while to get to Mudcat Grant. But the reality is, he was a really, really, really good pitcher throughout the 60s. He came up in 1958 for the Indians. And with the Indians, he was really good. From 58 to 62, he went 51-45 with a 4.06 ERA. He was regarded as a good pitcher, not great. Then 1963 happened. Grant made his first All-Star team. He went 13-14 with a 3.69 ERA. I understand that that's not a great season, but still, he made the All-Star team. You can't take that away from him. The funny thing is, though, that wasn't even his best season with the Indians. It was 61 when he went 15-9 with a 3.86 ERA. Like I said, he was regarded as a good, not great pitcher. So when the opportunity came to trade him to the Twins, the Indians jumped all over it, especially since in 1964 with the Indians, Grant went 3-4 with a 5.95 ERA. From the second Grant got to Minnesota, his career changed. He finished the year going 11-9 with a 2.82 ERA. Then the year after that, he etched his name in immortality. He went 21-7 with a 3.3 ERA. He led the American League in wins, winning percentage, and complete game shutouts. He made his second and last All-Star team. In fact, he even finished 6th in AL MVP voting that year. You gotta wonder how the voters thought that Zoilo Versalles, and Tony Oliva for that matter, were more important to the Twins than Grant was. Grant is one of 15 black pitchers to win 20 games in a season. In fact, Grant was the one who came up with the term Black Aces. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but in his later life, he dedicated himself to furthering the cause of African Americans in baseball. You may remember there was a Yankees game where CC Sabathia wore special cleats to honor the Black Aces. Guys like Grant and Gibson and Fergie Jenkins and Dave Stewart, Vida Blue, etc., etc. That wouldn't have happened if not for Grant. In 1965, the Twins made the World Series. They went up against the LA Dodgers. In a hard-fought 7-game series, the Dodgers won it, but Grant really stepped up. He started 3 games, went 2-1 with a 2.74 ERA, pitched 2 complete games. In fact, in Game 6 of that series, with the Twins down 3-2, Grant really put the game out of reach. The Twins were up 2-0 in the bottom of the 6th, thanks to a home run by Bob Allison. There were runners on first and second, 2 men out. Grant hit a 3-run home run. That made the score 5-0. It all but ensured that there would be a Game 7. Then in Game 7, Sandy Koufax pitched one of the greatest games of his career. Only gave up 3 hits, didn't give up a run. Dodgers won 2-0. Grant had one more really, really good year for the Twins. He went 13-13 with a 3.25 ERA in 66. Then in 67, he started spending a lot of time in the bullpen. He turned into a good reliever. However, he did make one famous start after that. Mudcat Grant is the answer to a fantastic trivia question. Who started the first game in Montreal Expos history? The answer is Grant. It was against the New York Mets. Grant only lasted 1 1/3 innings, gave up 6 hits, 3 runs. It was not a good performance, but the Expos won 11-10. The year after that, Grant had 24 saves for the Athletics. He was a great pitcher, make no mistake about it, and what he did in his later life can't be overstated. His book on the Black Aces is really, really good. Very important figure in baseball history. May he rest in peace. And in answer to your next question, the reason I didn't give you the origin of his nickname Mudcat is because I don't know it. I don't know why he got the nickname Mudcat. I wish I did, but I don't. I'm sorry. Alright, here's my interview with Andy Martino. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Andy Martino, the author of Cheated, the inside story of the Astros Scandal, and a colorful history of sign stealing. Andy, how are you?
Good, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing good. I know that your book starts out with a history of sign stealing, the 1900 Phillies, the 51 Giants, and I found that very interesting. I did. But the Astros sign stealing is near and dear to my heart as a Yankees fan, so I'd like to focus on that. I've got to start with the guy who turned a blind eye to the sign stealing, if I can use that term, at the very least did nothing to stop it.
How exactly did A.J. Hinch come to manage the Astros?
Well, in a way that informed how he turned that blind eye, Jacob. And by that, I mean A.J. Hinch was a standout young player. In fact, he beat out Derek Jeter for the Gatorade High School Player of the Year award back in the early 90s. A big recruit for Stanford, projected to be, potentially a star someday. He was a catcher. Unfortunately he performed very well in college, but unfortunately for him, didn't really pan out to meet the expectations as a pro. Backup catcher for a little bit in the big leagues. Spent a good amount of time in the minor leagues as well. He finally kind of wraps it up in AAA with the Phillies, 2004, I believe, and decides that he wants to launch a front office career. So he gets hired by the Arizona Diamondbacks to be a player development executive. Intends to become a general manager someday, and people around him, seeing that he's smart and hardworking and likable, they think that that's probably the career path he's going to take. Everything changes in 2009 when his friend Josh Burns, who was his boss, the GM of the Diamondbacks, is making a manager change, and he thinks that Hinch is somebody at 35 years old with no experience who can be an effective manager. So he takes a risk. He hires him. Not a bad move, because Hinch did have a lot of those leadership qualities. But what neither of them accounted for was that the veteran players in the Diamondbacks clubhouse really rebelled against that. They liked Bob Melvin, their previous manager. They liked Kirk Gibson, the bench coach, wanted him in some cases to be the manager. Hinch really never gained the respect of that clubhouse, and the older veterans really went after him in some ways, or at least didn't respect him. So that flames out after about a year. Hinch now wants to be a manager. You flash forward couple of years when Jeff Lunau and the Astros are looking for a manager. They hire Hinch. Hinch has got that blend of people skills and facility with analytics and data that all new GMs pretty much are looking for. But he's also carrying with him the experience and even the trauma of having that mutiny in Arizona, of not being respected by the veterans, of not gaining acceptance in the clubhouse. So that really makes him a bit conflict averse. So when there's a veteran like Carlos Beltran or a bench coach like Alex Cora who are encouraging the sign stealing techniques, Hinch, whether he likes it or not, and he says that he didn't, just wasn't strong enough to really do anything about it.
Interesting. Ship without a captain. Okay. All right. So how was Jeff Lunau perceived when he was with the Cardinals?
When Lunau was with the Cardinals, he was perceived by ownership and by plenty of people in the Cardinals front office as brilliant, as innovative, somebody who was going to bring that Moneyball, which was very trendy at the time, Moneyball style to the Cardinals. He came from a different world. He came from McKinsey, which is a consulting firm that's based on efficiency, very controversial in the world because of the amoral nature of some of the work that they do. But he was supposed to be somebody who brought the Cardinals into the new age, and he did bring a lot of ideas, but what he also brought was a lack of, I guess you could say, respect, a willingness to work with and listen to older school people in the organization. So he was really at odds with Tony La Russa, who was the manager. He was at odds with Walt Jocketty, who was the GM in the first years that Lunau was there. And he just wasn't somebody who was all that willing to listen to scouts, figure out what the institutional knowledge was and the traditions were. And really the flaw there was that he didn't strike a balance between the old school and new school. He was all new school, and that rubs people the wrong way, and really to the detriment of the team in some ways. And the same thing could be said for La Russa, because one person who knew the Cardinals very well at the time told me that both Lunau and La Russa were interested in defensive shifts, but because they couldn't get along personally, they couldn't collaborate on that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, look, that was something that you did a good job of illustrating, the fact that Lunau had no people skills. I mean, look, I'm an old soul, okay? I'm not a sabermetrics fan. I'm not a Moneyball fan. But I don't think that it needs to be absolute. I'm willing to listen to people on sabermetrics. If you have something interesting, I'll listen. I just don't need to be, beholden to it. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
I think everything in moderation. And the most successful baseball executives in the modern age are the ones who are able to speak to, listen to, and understand scouting, data, analytics, everything in there. So I think it's been understood as an either-or proposition. And part of that is the closed-mindedness of scouts and old-school managers, and part of that is the closed-mindedness of new-school people like Jeff Luhnow in those instances. So, yeah, I think that there is value to be taken from the old and the new, and unfortunately, too often in baseball, it's regarded as it's got to be one or the other. But that's getting better, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there 100%. So what can you tell us about the first half of Luhnow's Astros tenure?
Well, they were tanking, and it was a strategy where they basically said, look, we could win 60-some games or 70-some games. What's the difference? And they're going to tank for high draft picks, cut payroll, which the owner, Jim Crane, obviously didn't mind. And they were going to start to experiment and employ all these new ideas that they were into, whether it was looking at technology like purchasing high-speed cameras, being at the forefront of that, which later became widespread in baseball, to just game strategy. They were a team that was pushing to create a dynasty later on by completely tanking and employing controversial methods of, as I said, game theory that players in their own clubhouse didn't particularly enjoy. When they felt like guinea pigs. There were stories written by Evan Drellich, who's with the beat writer at the time for the Houston Chronicle covering the team. The Astros players felt like they were just numbers on a page to the front office, and it was sort of a dehumanizing experience, according to those guys, to play for the team. But it was also a completely effective, clearly, way to build up a team from blow it up and build it back up into a championship caliber team. So like so many things with Luhnow, it was a mix of effectiveness and an off-putting way to do it.
Yeah, look, I remember those tanking Astros teams. I consider myself a big baseball fan. I try to keep my finger on the pulse of everything. And I remember going to a Yankees game with my father during the Astros tanking years. I couldn't recognize like a half of the lineup. It was so crazy. Like, I don't like when teams do that. I don't think in baseball there's a place for that because it's so easy to spend money and make big trades and get your team competitive again. I think that's a big part of what turned some people off of Luhnow, his willingness to tank so much. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, there was a night when the local television rating of the Astros 2014, I think, was 0.0. And when you have that, is a problem. Every year is an opportunity to create new fans, create new memories. If you're an adult and the Astros are unwatchable for 3 to 5 years, that's unpleasant. If you're a child in Houston, that's pretty much your window to become a baseball fan or not, or a fan of the team or not. So I certainly agree. Like I said, every year is precious. It's not always good strategy from a front office perspective to go all in every year.
Right.
But there are ways to thread the needle. There are ways to put on a product that's not completely uninteresting. And we see it all the time still. There's a former Jeff Luhnow assistant GM, Mike Elias, who's been running the Baltimore Orioles, and where they have some good players this year and are more watchable. Sometimes it's tough so you're a Yankee fan. You see when the Yankees were playing the Orioles in 2018, 19, 20, it's like hard to get interested in that game because it's one major league team.
The Yankees won every game.
Well, that's true, but competition's fine. I get that, but you want to see a major league game, right? It shouldn't be too much to ask. So I agree.
I get it. Yeah. I mean, you give away Manny Machado for prospects. I don't think any of them have worked out.
Yeah.
It's tough to be an Orioles fan right now. There's no question. And I think the Yankees have shown that you can go on a competitive rebuild. Just look at what happened in 2016. They trade Chapman. They get Torres. They trade Miller. They don't get much of anything. They get Beltran. They get a prospect named Dylan Tate who gets flipped for Zach Britton. I think they've shown that you can go on a competitive rebuild. I think the Yankees have provided the blueprint of how you should rebuild in baseball.
That's right. And the Yankees had internal discussions in those years at the very, very end of the Jeter A-Rod years. It was, do we tank and break it down? Do we chase free agents still and try to win the World Series, or do you try to do something in between? And obviously what they settled on was something in between, which in fairness to some other teams is easier to do with the budget that they have. But still, it's not, you can't just do it because you have money. And 2015 making the playoffs, 2016, those trades you mentioned, those are crowning achievements of Brian Cashman's era. Now, it remains to be seen, as I'm sure you're frustrated by, if that's actually going to result in a championship team.
Tell me about it.
But right, I'm sure you're feeling that acutely, like most Yankee fans right now. But the fact is, you're right that not tank. They could have tanked and been where they are right now, or they could have remained competitive, and they remained competitive. I think that wild card game appearance in 2015 was in its own way a massive achievement for the team, because that was in theory what would have been like a tanking year for them, and they won 80 some games, somehow ended up in the wild card game.
Can I tell you something funny about that game? The Yankees, if you'll recall, backed into the playoffs that year. They were not a good team. I thought they were going to lose that game. It killed me to say it. I actually got sick for that game. I got the flu. Best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't have to go to the Bronx to watch that game.
Well, it wasn't a high-energy game for the Yankees, that's for sure, with Dallas Keuchel on the mound and the team not expected to do much. But so, yes, you're lucky you didn't spend your money and time that night, but I agree with your point about how they were able to stay above water during those years.
Talking to Andy Martino, the author of Cheated, the inside story of the Astros Scandal and a colorful history of sign stealing here on the Jacob Valk Show. I'm Jacob Valk. So, perfect segue from talking about the Yankees to the Red Sox. Can you lay out how the Red Sox stole the Yankees' signs using an Apple Watch?
Yeah, so in the 2017 season, for a little bit, a couple weeks, months, the Yankees and Red Sox had mutual suspicions. Red Sox coaches and some players felt that the Yankees were using the S Network cameras to steal their signs. What was actually going on was that the Red Sox were taping up scouting reports and some information to the back of the dugout and pieces of paper, and the Yankees replay guy was zooming in on them, which is, look, in baseball it's commonly understood. If you're careless enough to hang your scouting reports, we're going to look at them. So that's what the Yankees were up to. The Red Sox seemed to have their signs and they're really comfortable at bats when runners were on second base. But the Yankees were having a little bit of trouble figuring out exactly what was going on. So one night, their replay coordinator, Brett Weber, is able to use the cameras to see Red Sox trainer with an Apple Watch going over and whispering something to players like Dustin Pedroia, those players appearing to get a signal to the runner on second base, and the runner on second base getting it to the pitcher. So Weber isolated that video, showed it to Joe Girardi. Girardi showed it to Cashman. Cashman showed it to MLB. Investigation commences, and the Red Sox are penalized. Now, the Yankees were fined too, but not for sign stealing. It was for Larry Rothschild, the pitching coach at the time, calling the replay room to ask if a pitch was a ball or a strike. So the Yankees were not found guilty at that time. Red Sox were. I think the larger takeaway of that is that it caused Rob Manfred to issue a memo saying, basically, sign stealing has been like wink, wink for all of baseball history. With all this new technology, it's more serious, and from this day forward, violations will be punished more seriously. So that incident between the Yankees and the Red Sox really set the precedent for why the Astros situation, which was going on concurrently and then after, why that was such a violation.
Yeah, and I think that sign stealing is acceptable depending on how you do it. Like, if you have a runner on second and you see the catcher putting down a 1, and you're stupid enough to have that be a fastball, okay, fine. Don't be stupid enough to do that. But if you're using electronics or you're using a telescope in the bullpen like the 51 Giants, or you're using a buzzer like the 1900 Phillies, I think that's where you draw the line. I think when you use external devices, that's when you've crossed the line from acceptable to unacceptable. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what players tend to think. If you like you just said, if the opposing team can't guard its signs, and if you're smart enough to figure it out with your eyes while you're on base or even while you're in the dugout, then that's all good. It's about using things that are external to the field of play, whether it's a telescope or a high-speed camera, depending on the decade. Absolutely, that's the line.
So how exactly did Alex Cora become the Astros bench coach?
He had been out of the game for a little while. He retired, I believe, 2011. Spring training was his last time as a player. He's always known as a highly intelligent, likable guy, spoken of as a future GM or manager. He actually went to ESPN where he worked with Aaron Boone, and they became really good. They'd known each other, but they became really good friends there. And he told Boone that he was in broadcasting in part because he wanted to be a manager one day and he wanted to practice his English while on camera. And that was sort of surprising because his English is great. He's perfectly fluent. But it just showed, I think, his attention to detail, his ambition. So he's at ESPN for a while, decides it's time for him to get back in the game, and it was not hard for him to find a job. He was in demand right away. Seemed like a fit with the Astros because he was smart, he was savvy, he was young, he'd been on TV, he understood the latest trends, so they thought it would be a good fit.
Yeah, and look, there's no question that Cora is an incredibly smart guy. The hire certainly wasn't an extremely controversial one. It's just what Cora ended up leading that was the issue. And speaking of that, in order to properly tell this story, I have to ask a question that we all know the answer to. Please don't get mad at me. How did the Astros sign-stealing operation work?
Oh, sure. No, you're right. It does need to be refreshed. I mean, the first iteration, the most famous iteration of their sign-stealing operation was obviously there was a camera in center field that was used for just normal live feed replay, and a monitor wired up behind the dugout, a trash can in front of the monitor, an Astros player banging on the trash can for an off-speed pitch so the batter could hear it.
Unbelievable. I mean, it's something I don't even know how that comes up. What goes off in your head that makes you think that's going to be a good look for you? Seriously, I ask you.
No, good question. I think a couple things. I think it's a process. I think you don't get there on day one. I think you get there by trying to steal signs the legal, old-fashioned way, and then technology comes into the game, and then it's tempting to look at the screen, and then you start workshopping different ways to get that sign to the batter. And you cross a line like that gradually. And also, there has been a tradition, like in winter ball in Latin America, that stuff like this has gone on, the different norms in different places. It's not out of nowhere that the Astros did it, but they certainly appear to be the only team in MLB that took it that far.
Yeah, and going back to the banging for a sec, my father and I made a pact when the Astros sign-stealing became public. We are going to the first Astros-Yankees game at Yankee Stadium. It doesn't matter what else is going on. We are going to that game. Obviously, the coronavirus, Yankees-Astros didn't happen. This year it did happen. The first game was May 4th. And what I did was, and I hope you appreciate this, I smuggled in a drumstick, had it hooked into my sock, threaded up my leg, and started banging against the rail on the aisle at certain points in the game. I just wanted to do my part to tick off the Astros.
Well, you were part of a real vibe that night. I could tell even on TV that it was as intense as the stadium has been all year so far, for sure.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I mean, the F. Altuve chants, F. Correa, F. Bregman. Admittedly, I will say this, when Rougned Odor collided with Martin Maldonado and Odor was walking to the Yankees dugout, I did scream at Maldonado, "Get the F up, you," what's a nice way to say it? Cat, I guess. Quoted in a Tom Jones song. I guess that's yeah, thank you. I try to run a clean show here. Talking to Andy Martino, the author of Cheated, the inside story of the Astros Scandal and a colorful history of sign stealing here on the Jacob Valk Show. I'm Jacob Valk. So when did teams first suspect that the Astros were stealing signs?
Right away. 2017, May 26th, I think it was. The first day of the trash can scheme was against the Orioles in Houston. Buck Showalter, the manager, Dan Duquette, the GM, right away was like, something's up. These swings are too comfortable. They couldn't figure out what it was. And really, for the next 3 years, there were rampant accusations, speculation, teams, front offices talking to each other. What do you think the Astros are doing? What do you think the Astros are doing? Complaints to Major League Baseball. So a lot of suspicion for several years.
How culpable is Major League Baseball in letting that sign stealing fester as long as it did? If everyone has these suspicions and they're going to Major League Baseball, how does Major League Baseball let it go on for as long as it did?
Well, I suppose in fairness to MLB on that point, their strategy was to try to create tighter regulations through the years and hope that a scandal like this never became so big. It obviously didn't work out that way because Mike Fiers ended up going on the record and talking to The Athletic. But as they got these complaints, certainly some teams and opponents felt that they should have been more aggressive in policing it. They just tried to create more rules, and it was harder to do this in 2019 than in 2017 because of a lot of new procedures that were in place. But it obviously it wasn't enough to prevent something like this from blowing up in their faces. So that's what ended up happening.
Yeah, you know what I didn't like was you have these rules, and it's great, okay, I get that. Thank you for having the rules, but you don't enforce them. We have laws in this country, and we have the criminal justice system to enforce it. Where was the criminal justice system in Major League Baseball?
Well, yeah, they were trying, as I said, they were trying to create tighter rules, and not so much rules even, but enforcement was like, so they had monitors, people in the clubhouses by 2019, and there were team officials who would say, like, they were looking over your shoulder when you were in the replay room, and they would report you to MLB if you did anything that you shouldn't be doing. So they were trying to tighten up the enforcement. It's just that they weren't doing it fast enough. Okay,
so 2017, we all know what happened that year. The Yankees lose to the Astros in the ALCS. Incredible performance in Game 7 by Charlie Morton and Lance McCullers. Then they go on to beat the Dodgers in the World Series. Really, really exciting World Series, except for Game 7, which was a little bit of a snooze fest. But overall, exciting World Series. Did the Astros cheat during that postseason?
Yes, they did. The monitor was there. The garbage can was there. They continued to scheme in the postseason.
Because of that, do you think the win has an asterisk on it?
It definitely does in people's minds. Whether or not there's anything officially done about that, and I don't think there will be because there hasn't been yet, and MLB decided against stripping them of their title. But sure, look how we're talking about the Astros. Does anybody talk about what a wonderful run they had in 2017 and how great they were? No, of course not. It's a asterisk in reputation, if not in the record books.
Yeah, look, I was talking to a fan who was sitting behind me the other day, and it came out that she lives in Houston. She's an Astros fan. So I said to her as she was leaving, enjoy your tainted World Series. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone outside of Houston that doesn't think that World Series win is legitimate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. And even just some of the blowback I've gotten on the book is very Houston-based. It seems like the rest of the country pretty much understands the situation the same way.
Don't worry about the Houston fans. You did a very good job. I enjoyed reading this book, Andy. I want you to know that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think, Houston fans, you're going to react to things you see online or on Twitter or whatever. So certain people are. But, as you saw since you read it, there's an effort to be fair to the people who were involved, an effort to understand how they got there and how it happened. This isn't, this is real life, as you know. It's not good guys and bad guys, like heroes and villains. There's shades of gray in how everybody acts, and there's context. Carlos Beltran's a really good person, but
right.
He was in a situation where this happened, and it is what it is.
Right, and one other thing that I think deserves mentioning is you're right that the Astros fans probably don't have this book, prominently displayed in their house. But right. I feel like if, this had happened to the Yankees fans would feel the same way. If this had happened to the Red Sox fans would have felt the same way. Cubs fans, White Sox fans, Mets fans, any fan you want, I think they'd feel the same way. I don't think this is a Houston Astros only issue. What are your thoughts on that?
No, yeah, that's a great point. There's a certain tribal mentality that is part of why people want to be a fan of a team. You have this common passion, and you'll defend people irrationally. It's just the way it is, part of being a sports fan. So I do agree that if the Yankees are in the same situation, fans would feel the same way. So, and look you talk about the chants about Altuve. I mean, despite the fact that there's actually evidence that Altuve wasn't much of a participant in this, that's still the feeling that Yankee fans have and the chant that they have. So it's not like there's rationality, purely on every side of the fence here. That's what fandom is about. Is
it true that in 2019 he had that bad tattoo, or was there something there?
The tattoo, look, there's no evidence there really isn't any evidence credibly to indicate that he was wearing that buzzer that was rumored in 2019. I looked into it. When you're writing a book about this, you'd love for the wildest things to be true. It's more interesting that way. But fact is, there's no evidence other than the rumor that is there. And there's the fact that of all the Astros players, he was one of the few that really wasn't into having the signs in the first place in 2017.
Okay. All right. No, I like hearing that. At least the home run was legitimate. Terrible moment. So. Terrible moment in Yankees history. No one remembers the DJ LeMahieu home run, but at least that moment is legitimate.
And what an at-bat that was by LeMahieu that's forgotten. I was covering that game, and what an at-bat to tie the game, right? Did it tie the game? Yeah, they went into the bottom of the ninth tie, right. Yeah, that was a great moment forgotten for LeMahieu, for sure.
It's like Alfonso Soriano. Alfonso Soriano in I think you know what I'm getting at. Okay.
Yeah. In 2001, yep.
Right, yeah, against the Diamondbacks. Talking to Andy Martino, the author of Cheated, the inside story of the Astros Scandal and a colorful history of sign stealing, here on the Jacob Valk Show. I'm Jacob Valk. So do you think that Major League Baseball did the right thing by giving the Astros players immunity?
It was the only thing that they could do to get information. It really was. One of the issues that they'd had investigating the Astros and the prior complaints that teams had made, including the Yankees, was that they don't have subpoena power. They can't make anyone talk to their investigators, but they can say that now that there's a player on the record accusing you of something, we can promise not to suspend you if you come in and tell us the truth. And so that's what they did. And they got so much criticism for it. I'm sure they would look for ways to do it differently in the future for something that comes up. But there's a players association. It's very strong. It's a collectively bargained process. So I don't think it was a good look, but I also can't really personally think of another way that they could have actually practically done it.
All right. As much as I hate to say it, I tend to agree with you. Here's what ticks me off about the immunity, though, and it's not going to be the obvious thing. Carlos Beltran. Okay, I'm a Yankee fan. I hate the Mets. I'm one of those Yankees fans that hates the Mets. Mm-hmm. Beltran was a player with the Astros, so he should have been granted immunity. Okay, yeah. The report names Beltran by name, doesn't name any other player. The only reason that I think Beltran was named was because he was manager of the Mets. I just really hated that double standard by Major League Baseball. I felt that was really unfair to the Mets. and that's coming from a Mets hater. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're not alone. Beltran has a lot of friends in the game who feel like it was really unfair to put him in the report. He had a unique status in this because as a player at the time, but not a player during the investigation, right? He'd retired since. He wasn't represented by the Players Association counsel in the same way as, say, Alex Bregman was or anybody else on the team. So put him in the report was aggressive. It was a de facto punishment, and a lot of people that care about Carlos Beltran feel that it was not fair.
Yeah, and look, I understand that the Mets didn't have any other decision but to move on from Beltran. It's certainly a bad look for the Mets. It was a bad look for Brody. Okay, terrible moment in Mets history. A long list, but it's there. But let me ask you this. Let's say 20 years from now, a guy like Brian McCann becomes manager, or Josh Reddick, or George Springer. Mm-hmm. Are we going to hear 20 years from now that they were actually involved in this?
Well, George Springer certainly was. And, to an extent, the cases of Reddick, Altuve, and McCann are complicated. They didn't get that bang on the trash can during their at-bats nearly as often as the other players, but they did get it sometimes. Now, was it an accident? Was it that they didn't want it? Was it to convey location in the pitch? Was it only in a certain count? There's lingering questions there. But, yeah, I don't know that there's more to come out about those guys than what I just said. You never know. I mean, Brian McCann could be 80 years old and on his last legs and say, I did it. Who knows? I don't claim to know everything, but the reporting was that he wasn't as involved and those guys weren't. Springer was right up there with guys that were getting the trash can bangs almost as much as anybody. Right.
And I'm not trying to say that you did a bad job. You didn't. You did a fantastic job. Okay, great book. Can't recommend it enough. Wouldn't be interviewing you if I thought the book was bad. It's just it's one of those things where I think since you've set the precedent that an Astros player can't be manager because they were involved in this, I think that needs to hold for the 24 or 25 other guys on that team. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you make a good point logically. I don't think it'll play out that way. I think Beltran was very much that decision was a product of the moment. Right, Hinch gets fired. Cora steps down. All eyes are on the Mets. It was a crazy week. Is Beltran going to be able to manage the team with all the questions he's going to get about this? Will it ever end? Will it be a distraction? And I do think the calculus will be different down the line in a way that's unfortunate for Beltran because he wanted to keep that job.
Oh, I'm sure he did. And I think he would have done a solid job. Not that Rojas is doing a bad job. I just think that Beltran would have done a good job also. Do you think that the Astros and Red Sox's punishments fit their crimes?
Well, it sort of goes back to what we were talking about before with how the immunity was necessary for them to get the story. I think the Red Sox and the Astros are definitely different cases. The Red Sox are not alleged or proven to have gone nearly as far as what the Astros did in 17 or 18. The Red Sox did the Apple Watch sign stealing before that Manfred memo in 17. Obviously, that's what led to it. So I think with the Red Sox, yes, it was appropriate. With the Astros, it just gets back to that age-old question and that you and I were talking about before about what they maybe deserved versus what was possible. That's the issue.
Well, here's what I'll come back with you on the Red Sox. Part of that report did indicate that there was like a Red Sox replay official that was doing something wrong. I don't remember exactly what it was, but
they were doing code breaking in the replay room, similar to what the Astros are doing with their code breaker program. That's right. But there was no evidence of real-time sign stealing directly to the batter, basically, which you could be skeptical of, but that's what they found.
Right. The notion that replay official was acting independently by himself without Alex Cora knowing, to me, is just ludicrous. The fact that Cora was allowed back to the Red Sox, and I'm not saying this as a Yankees fan, I'm saying this as a baseball fan. The fact that Alex Cora was allowed back to the Red Sox, to me, is a terrible job by Manfred. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. Should he be banned for life though? Like you have managers.
No, he shouldn't be banned for life, but he should be banned from the Red Sox, the team that had this going on. Let him go to the Tigers. Let him go to another team like AJ Hinch did. I'm okay with that, but don't let him go back to the same team.
I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be tough if a guy was eligible to work to tell one team that they can't hire him if they want him, though. So I hear what you're saying, that if this stuff went on in Boston, the same manager's back, it's not a great look, and you're certainly not alone in feeling that way. But I don't know. I think once you're eligible, you're eligible. And the way I looked at Cora and Hinch was just like, look, McGuire and Bonds have both had coaching jobs at a certain point. This is not a game that bans people for life for the most part.
Right? No, I'm not.
Examples.
I'm not saying ban Cora for life. What I'm saying is ban him from the team that he let this go on for. I don't want AJ Hinch managing the Astros again.
Yeah, I hear you. I just don't know if you could enforce that.
Okay. All right, that's fair. All right, Andy, I'll get you out on this. I think that the Astros' apology in spring training last year should be shown in every PR class in the world as an example of how not to make public apologies. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, it was brutal. I mean, it was you had these very perfunctory short statements followed by body language of defiance. It was clearly, look, there's resentment in the Astros. I think that they feel singled out for this, which doesn't really hold up to scrutiny, but that's definitely a feeling that some of them have. And Jim Crane saying it probably didn't help. I mean, the way that baseball, I was at Tampa at the time, Yankees camp. Aaron Boone never criticizes anybody, and he was basically ripping Jim Crane and the Astros for that. Cody Bellinger over in Arizona was strongly ripping that whole press conference. It was certainly not the model of accountability or good PR. I couldn't agree with you more, and that didn't help their reputation. It's part of the reason why that group of players is always going to be identified with this in a negative way, because they didn't strike people as particularly sorry, and that's what people were looking for.
Do you watch The Office?
I do.
You remember the episode where Dwight Schrute said, "I state my regret," like a robot?
That's right. That's a great analogy, actually. I never thought of that, but that's a great analogy. That's exactly Alex Bregman stated his regret because he had to, but one didn't get the sense that he truly felt it or meant it.
He couldn't have memorized it because he didn't feel it.
Right.
All right, Andy, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, that was Andy Martino. His book is Cheated, the Inside Story of the Astros Scandal and a Colorful History of Sign Stealing. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. New York Yankees show comes your way tonight. Regular episodes of the Jacob Valk show come your way every weekday afternoon. On Wednesday, you're going to get an interview that I'm going to do with Matt Frazier and Robert Cheek, the authors of a book on being an athlete with a plant-based diet. Very, very interesting topic. Until next time, I am Jacob Valk saying that I think I hold the record for most games watched in a career.